ordinary council meeting. Today's Tuesday the 26th of May, held at the Koroit Theatre at 2 p.m. First of all, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and the elders from other communities who may be watching today. Recording of council meetings. Please note that today's meeting is being audio recorded. This recording will be uploaded to the council's website and will be accessible by the general public. By participating in and addressing those present at the meeting, you consent to any information you disclose, including any personal information or sensitive information, being recorded and uploaded to the website. Will you please stand for the prayer? Almighty God, we humbly beseech your blessing on the council, direct and prosper its deliberations for the welfare of the people of the Moyne Shire. Amen. Are there any apologies?
There are no apologies.
Do we have any declarations of interest for today's council meeting? Councillor Parker.
With regard to, it's one of the confidential gender items, so I won't mention it.
Okay, thank you. Any others? I'll have a confirmation of the minutes. Recommendation that the minutes from the last ordinary council meeting, Tuesday 28th of April, be confirmed. Any questions or queries on those minutes? Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Parker is the mover, seconded by Councillor Ryan. Councillor Parker?
No need.
Thank you. Councillor Ryan?
Nothing from me.
All those in favour? Carried 7-0. Moving on to public participation. We do have one public participant today. Just checking if they are indeed here to address council. Not here. Okay. We'll move on to agenda item 1. The monthly financial performance report, to be introduced by Mr. Ledden, please, the Director of Community and Corporate Services.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, this finance report sets out Council's actual performance against budget for the 10 months to the end of April 2020. The report sets out that our operating budget of around $40 million remains favourable to budget. The most significant impact of COVID on Council, as we know, is upon caravan park revenue. And what I can report to you at the moment is that the closure of the parks sees a revenue reduction of around $160,000 for the month of April. But as we know, caravan parks, camping grounds are opening probably sooner than we anticipated. So the revenue loss for COVID across this financial year, but certainly the next financial year, will most likely be a lot less than we anticipated, depending on the take-up of our clients. So we were anticipating that the revenue loss and the closures would run on into next financial year. So I think that's a relative positive, Mayor. Our childcare centres, kindergartens are returning numbers pretty strongly, so they'll be back to reasonably normal operations fairly soon as well. But overall, our operating budget is quite positive and favourable at the end of April, and obviously we'll have some impacts throughout May as well. The capital works budget of Council sits at an actual spend of $15 million at the end of April, so for the 10 months. By the way, that's the original capital works budget that Council set for this year, but with carry forwards from the previous year, the target is $26 million. The major items that remain unspent at this point in time are the Garbuck Hall, which obviously we've had the funding announcement that'll be carried forward of $225,000, the Vic Park Pavilion works of $400 that are progressing but won't be a lot spent, The Port Fairy Bowls Club has a balance of 1.6 remaining unspent. That's in progress. The East Beach landfill, 1.5 million unspent. And we've let the contract for the rock at the last council meeting. And there's about $3 million of our roads program that will be spent in Mr. Greenberger's area. So that's about 6.7 million. You'd expect that well over half of that would be spent in the remaining 2 months. So that's where we sit with capital works, and the usual detailed report is there. There are 3 variations contained in this finance report. The Hawkesdale Community Plan and Grant funding of $20,110, so that's a net nil for council. The Foxhour Road Private Works Security Release, non-budgeted, of $55,100. That's to be applied to the purchase of GPS equipment. That's a net nil for council as well. And the remaining item is screens at the Visitor Information Centre, works to be done there for $13,000. So the overall net impact on the budget is the $13,000 only. I'd also mention, councillors, and you are aware that council has been allocated $2.7 million as part of the federal government's Local Roads and Community Infrastructure program. So these funds, allocated on a roads to recovery basis across councils, are to support jobs, business and resilience in local economies. So council will be considering a list of projects to be prioritised as part of that allocation, noting that those projects should be shovel ready and are to be expended by the 30th of June next year. But I think, councillors, that's good news for this council, that $2.7 million, you will determine which projects we get the best bang for buck for. They've got to be ready to go, but they may be projects that could not be done in our budget. So I think that's some positive news. That'll be coming your way soon. So the recommendation, Mayor, is that the finance report, including those variations, be received. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ladden. So, yeah, obviously just a quick comment first. It's excellent that we did receive that funding from both the state last week and also federal governments for support of local council. So I'll now like to call for any questions, please, we might have for Mr. Ladden on anything in this report. Councillor Lockett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's probably more of a question for Mr. Greenberger, but Mr. Ladden might be able to answer it. It's just regarding the COVID-19 restrictions and our capital works. Has it dramatically impacted or not so much?
Through you, Mayor, I'll make an attempt and then pass to Mr. Greenberger. But I know through my team and Jackie Anderson on community projects, things are rolling on, or maybe a little bit more slowly in terms of trying to get the engagement with contractors and meetings on site, but they are progressing. Yeah. So I don't think in my area it will be major. Mr. Greenberg might.
He's nodding.
Similarly.
Great, thank you. It's important for the public to know. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any other questions for Mr. Ladden before we see a mover? Okay, we have a mover, please, for the financial report. Councillor Lockett is the mover.
Oh, no,
Second
I'll ask
by-
how it's been moved.
Second by Councillor Ryan. Councillor Lockett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's a fair and accurate document, and excellent work happening in that space despite the COVID-19 restrictions. I think Moyne's done a fantastic job of maintaining financial stability through difficult times. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Lockett. Councillor Ryan.
No, I have nothing further to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if I
Councillor
may.
Lucas.
On page, you can either page 20 or page 47 of 54, recreation leisure, it's got Port Fairy Rail Goods Shed, exterior renewal and landscaping, 120,000. We must have passed that some time ago. Because
Through you, Mayor, I'll take that one on notice, Councillor Dukas. I would have been expecting that was $60,000.
Yeah, well, the 60,000 is in there somewhere else under a different heading.
Yeah, I'll just have to check through you, Mayor.
Yep, thanks, Mr. Led. Councillor Lucas, any other questions or comments?
No, well, we'll get an answer over the next few days, I suppose.
Any other
Thank
councillor
you.
wishing to speak to the motion? Councillor Lockett is the mover.
No further need, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lockett. All those in favour of the finance report? Councillor Lucas? Thank you. Carried 7-0. Moving on to item 2, public interest disclosures. Thanks again to Mr. Ledden.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, this is a policy review. It's part of our policy framework review, but it's been triggered by a change in legislation. So the the protected disclosures policy is now being replaced by the public interest disclosures policy. And as the report sets out, those changes came into effect from 1 January, so all councils are required to change their policies. So under protected disclosure, council needs to establish processes to facilitate the disclosures of improper conduct, manage the receipt of information and provide protections to the parties who may be involved. So not dissimilar to the previous piece of legislation, and operates in tandem to the IBAC disclosures that are the responsibility of the CEO for corrupt matters or potentially corrupt matters. The policy is attached, councillors, and as I said, is not significant changes, but we have to have appropriate processes to receive those complaints, pass them on to IBAC and protect the persons who are making those complaints. That's the essence of the report and the policy. Happy to take questions, Mayor, but the recommendation is that Council adopt the Public Interest Disclosures Policy, OD010, as attached to the report, which replaces the previous Protected Disclosures Policy.
Thanks, Mr. Ledden. We have questions for Mr. Ledden on item 2. Mr. Ledden.
Through Mayor, I should just add, Councillor Parker did raise the inclusion of an officer's name, and on checking that is required as giving actual personal contact to the complainant. So I took that on board, thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Lucas with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All these disclosures, or all the disclosures that can be made, aren't necessary to be referred to IBAC, or are they only IBAC type disclosures?
Through you, Mayor, so any, I guess, complaints or allegations of misconduct as part of this process are referred on to IBAC.
Right. So if a person or, well, it says here, companies and businesses may not make a disclosure. So what do they do?
Do you know
On
what?
page 2 or 4,
In the actual, through you, Mayor, in the actual policy, Councillor.
well, it says who can make a disclosure, and it says any individual or group of individuals. Companies and businesses may not make disclosures.
Sorry, through Mayor, my understanding would be it's an individual. Could be part of that company, but it's got to be a person, associated with that
Right,
company.
not a company name.
Not a
type.
company name, yeah.
All right. And it's all in relation to IBAC. So if someone's got like a whistleblower says, I'd like you to report X, Y, or Z, that's different.
Correct, through Mayor, yeah. So if there's allegations of misconduct by the council or its officers, yeah, this is the appropriate channel to feed that into.
Right.
Any other questions for Mr. Ledden? Seeker mover. Councillor Ryan's a mover, seconded by Councillor Parker. Councillor Ryan.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I regard this as a procedural motion. It's purely updating our processes, keeping abreast of current legislation.
You, Councillor Parker. Further? Any other councillors wishing to speak to the motion? Councillor Ryan is the mover.
Put it to the vote.
All those in favour? Carried 7-0. Moving to item 3 on the agenda, Moyne Shire representative to the Municipal Association of Victoria. Once again, Mr. Ledden to introduce, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, procedural, I guess, in nature, but councils can appoint representatives to the Municipal Association of Victoria. So I'm our peak representative body. And I think as we change mayors, we change representative. So it's probably done on an annual basis if there's a change of mayor. So the council needs to determine who will be the Moyne Shire representative for the MAV and a substitute representative. My understanding is usual practice is for that to be the mayor and the deputy mayor. But over to you, councillors, for the recommendation.
Thanks, Mr. Ledden. Do we have any councillors wishing to move the motion with councillors in that motion? Councillor Wolf.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I believe it's appropriate that the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor represent council, so for that reason I'll nominate Councillor Mead as the representative and Councillor Ryan, who is the Deputy Mayor, to be the substitute representative. That's my recommendation and motion.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Smith, seconder. Any councillors wishing to speak to that motion? No. Councillor Wolf.
I've explained the reasons for those nominations, Mr. Mayor, so nothing further to add.
Do all those in favour? Carried 7-0. Moving to item 4, Unused Road Licences Policy Review. Presented by the Director of Infrastructure and Environment, Mr. Trevor Greenberger. Welcome, Trevor.
Thanks, Mayor. This is part of our 4-yearly cycle of policy reviews. In relation to unused road licences, we're not recommending any substantial changes to the policy other than update it to our current or revised organisational structure, but the intent of the policy remains the same. Probably the important part of the policy is the fact that any changes to unused road licences, whether it's to become licensed or become unlicensed or used for another purpose, that decision will always come back to council, and that's what this policy describes. Happy to take questions, Mayor.
Questions for Mr. Greenberger? Yes, Councillor Dukas.
I'm the only one with questions today. Mr. Greenberger, page 2 of 4, it's got a list of types of roads under the heading definition. Discontinued government road. It says land where the road status of being a Crown or government road has been extinguished and then subsequently transferred. How do you transfer it to the Crown if it's already a Crown?
Through you, Mayor, the report that we have later today is probably an example of this with Rogers Place. So that may not be described well, Councillor Dukas, but what it's basically intending is to say that once council makes a decision to discontinue a road, it then reverts to the Crown for them to make a decision as to what they do next, whether that's sale of the land or retention of the land.
All right, thanks, Mr. Greenberg. Any other questions? All right, we'll seek a mover for the motion, please. Moved by Councillor Smith, seconded by Councillor Lockett. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's no substantial changes since the review was done in 2016, and I think it's just updating the policy on unused roads, so I'm more than happy to move the motion. Thank you.
Councillor Smith. Councillor Lockett.
Nothing further, thank you.
Any other councillors wishing to speak to this motion?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dukas.
Back to Mr. Greenberger on page 4 of 5 under notes. it's got a sentence there to do with the licence holder having unlocked swinging gates on any crossroad fencing.
Through you, Mayor, sorry, Councillor Diggs, what page was it?
I've got page 4 or 5, reading from the top.
And your question, sorry?
The question is in relation to the licence holder having to put in unlocked swinging gates on crossroad or crossroad fencing. So what do you mean by crossroad fencing?
Through you, Mayor, essentially what that means is where there's essentially an intersection with the unused government road. So what it means is if a farmer wanted to graze that road reserve, they would need to have an unlocked gate to allow other vehicles to pass through that particular road reserve. That often happens in rural properties where you've got farms or neighbouring farms with those unused government roads traversing both of the properties.
Any other councillors wishing to speak to the motion?
Can I follow up on that? So does that also mean, like when it says crossroad fencing, if there's another road that goes through the middle of that lease, is that what you're telling me? So you can't actually block that road off. You can have a fence on your lease part, either end, but the road that crosses your lease part, right, to stop cattle going up and down the road, you can have a gate, but it's got to be unlocked for any traffic to go through.
Through you, Mayor, that's exactly right, just as you described, Councillor Diggs.
Not going the same way though.
Not going the same way, going across.
Going across. So if there's, say, another unused road going east-west as opposed to your north-south, you have the swinging gates to let them through.
Through you, Mayor, that's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lucas. Councillor Smith, as the mover.
Nothing further to add, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. All those in favour of item 4? Carried 7-0. Item 5, parking controls policy. Mr. Greenberg.
Thanks again, Mayor. This policy is also part of the 4-yearly review. In this instance, we are talking about or proposing that we change the policy substantially. The existing policy basically describes the parking restrictions that occur in the Port Fairy, the city of Port Fairy during the summer period. Given that that is a motion or a previous motion of council, that stands without the need for a policy anyway. But what we've done in relation to this policy is describe situations where we'll receive a request for a parking restriction. That might be a minor request just for a particular one park, for example. In that instance, the policy describes that the director or my position would have delegated authority to actually act on that request. But where the proposal is a significant proposal, and I guess the recent changes we've made to Croydon through the commercial road would be what we class as a substantial proposal. Those would be referred back to council, and they would need to be supported by evidence of community support. So that's essentially the upshot of the policy, but happy to take questions, man.
Right, any questions for Mr. Greenberger? Okay, I'll seek a mover, please. Councillor Wolfe is the mover, seconded by Councillor Lockett. Councillor Wolfe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Provides orderly control and organisation of parking.
Thanks, Councillor Wolfe. Councillor Lockett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Often a tricky thing, and I have my own views about parking in the Shire, and I will reserve them for another time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any other councillors wishing to speak to this motion? Councillor Wolfe, in summary.
Nothing further, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. All those in favour, please. Carried 7-0. Item 6, proposed removal of section of road from road register in consideration of road discontinuance process adjacent to 1 and 1A Rogers Place, Port Fairy. Director of Infrastructure and Environment, Mr. Greenberger, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Before I start, I just wanted to let the councillors know that we have heard from Mr Bolsh, who is a late apology, but he is looking forward to, with interest, of hearing the outcome of this report. As described in the report, this is quite an unusual circumstance that dates back to the 1960s, where a private property has encroached onto a road reserve and in actual fact has built onto the road reserve. This report is basically looking at a way to resolve that issue for both the council, the Crown and the landowner. We've been through a public submission process in relation to discontinuing that part of the road reserve and removing it from the council's road register, and we have received one submission from Mr Bolsh, and that's outlined or attached to the report with some a range of concerns outlined by himself and his wife. In considering that submission, on balance, we believe that there is an opportunity to resolve this issue if we do discontinue the road reserve and remove that from the road register. If that recommendation today is supported, it will then revert back to the Crown for them to make a decision on what they do with that parcel of land and whether they sell it to the adjoining landowner, but the indications are that would be their intent. We think this is a good outcome in the sense that it resolves a long-standing issue without a huge impact on the community, but others may disagree. At this point, Mayor, I'll hand over to see if there's any questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Mr Greenberger on item 6? Councillor Lockett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Forgive me if it is in the report because I've been getting a bit lost in the quagmire of the details. Will the land, the Crown land, will the owners have to buy that land? And how to, or, yeah, they, yeah.
So through you, Mayor, that is the process. So what would happen is once council makes the determination to remove it from the road register and discontinue it, it then goes back to the Crown, and they would start a process of actually selling that parcel of land to the adjoining landowner.
Thank you, Mr
Any other questions? Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. How would have this got through? I know it would have been in the old Shire days, but I'm just wondering, could this happen again under our current management? And in the letter there it says definite public benefit, and I'm just a little bit wondering what the definite public benefit is of selling 76 square metres of land in a tightly held court. Could this happen again under our current management? And what is the public benefit of selling the land? Just looking at the map, the extra 2 metres, it's used for car park for the people accessing the beach. And I think even though it's only a very small parcel of land, it should stay in the public hands and not revert, because there has been an error made somewhere.
Councillor Smith, sorry, just a question. We'll have questions at this stage and you can mount your argument.
Sorry, Mr Mayor.
Mr Greenberger, for those questions.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll try to remember them all. In relation to could it happen again, I would think that current day's processes and the tools that we have available to review those sorts of decisions, I'd be very confident that wouldn't happen again. But I guess in the 1960s, they probably didn't have the processes or the tools that we have in the current day. In relation to whether it provides a definite community benefit, I think if we were to not proceed through this process, we would then have to go back to the landowner who has built across the property and ask them to remove a portion of their house, which would not be a pleasant process. So I think that's where the definition of benefit comes from. And in relation to the impact of selling this parcel or this portion of land, looking at the maps that are attached to the report, you would still be able to provide for parking on the nature strip portion of that road. And you've also got a median strip through Rogers Place that also allows for parking where a lot of the anglers also park with their boat trailers. So I hope that answers all your questions, Councillor Smith. I'll pause there, Mayor.
Thanks. Councillor Lockett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Raises another kind of question. I suppose every planning permit is seen each on its merits, but would this set a precedent for obviously the other properties on that side of the street, but also the other side of the street?
Through you, Mayor, it may set a precedent, but I think in this instance, the main issue is you've got an actual constructed dwelling over the boundary, which I think is cause for special circumstance, whereas any other application would need to be assessed on its merits, but we're not aware of any constructed dwelling going over the boundary.
Follow-up question, Councillor Lockett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, last one. Is the alternative to this to ask them to knock their house down?
Through you, Mayor, without extinguishing this parcel from our road register and discontinue it as a road, that would be our next course of action.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wolfe with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Similar to Councillor Lockett's question, is there any way, I know a house has been partly built on the land that we're looking at possibly disposing of. Is there any way we can have some sort of caveat or legal document that these people or next door, which is part of this resolution, can't build out on that piece of land that they're intending to acquire? Otherwise, as Councillor Lockett said, next door will build a house right to their property line, which is going to impose on others.
Yeah, through you, Mayor, that would be a matter for the department once it's handed back to them. So council's jurisdiction is to discontinue it as a road reserve and remove it from the road register. It then goes back to the Crown to consider whether there's caveats or whatever it might be through the process of the sale of the parcel of land.
Any other questions for Mr. Greenberger? Councillor Smith.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Greenberger, I'm just wondering, look, I'm keen to see the land stay in public use. Is there any way that Councillor Wolfe may have alluded, Councillor Lockett, but whether that a caveat or something could be put on for the life of the owners, for the life of the building, and if it is rebuilt, that it returns back to the normal title, because and then it's a win-win. They don't have to alter their building, but we might be able to charge a fee or something for use of the land.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. Mr. Greenberg.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. There has been a number of solicitors involved in this process. I'm not sure whether the situation that Councillor Smith has described has been considered, but I can tell you that the solicitors believe that this is the most appropriate way to deal with the issue. To consider whether a caveat is possible, I'd need to take that on notice and do some more research.
Thank you. Councillor Parker.
I've got a question that I think might be addressed to Mr. Davis rather than to Mr. Greenberg on this side. Planning permit for any further development on that block. What would be the regulations as to how close to the front boundary a building could be built?
Lot 2.
Mr. Davis, the Director of Planning, would you like to take that question, please?
Oh, Mayor, I'll just thank you. Sorry, Councillor Parker, can you just ask that again? So, planning permit was to be issued for in the future?
In the future, for a building on lot 2, or for further extensions, if you like, on lot 1, what would be the regulation with regards to setback from the front boundary?
Through you, Mayor, it would depend on what's put forward, and we have to assess it against setbacks from the street, what was considered as from the street. Side setbacks, we would have to look at what's put before us, but I don't understand in this case that anything else has been contemplated other than the rectification of what's there at the moment.
Thank you. Any last questions before we get a mover? Okay, we'll seek a mover for the motion, please. Councillor Lockett.
I'll seek a deferral.
Seek a deferral.
Is it, just to clarify, is this the spot to do it?
Yeah, you can move that we defer the motion.
Yeah, thank you.
we have a seconder for a deferral? We have a deferral. Wish to speak to a deferral, Councillor Lockett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we can already see how many questions we've still got about this matter. It was, come about in the 60s. I don't think there's an urgent hurry for it. I mean, obviously parties would like, and I'm sure council would like, a resolution on this now, but I feel like, how many questions have we got? There still could be better outcomes for this parcel of land. I feel quite reluctant to, to sell public Crown land. I know there was a big town march when council were looking at many years ago selling the barbecue area at Rogers Place. It's a very significant place, and I understand there's been mistakes made in the past, but I wouldn't like to rush into it. And I think if we could look into the possibility of caveats would be fantastic. So I'll seek a deferral for a month at least. Thank you.
Councillor Smith, second to deferral.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
We'll just do a quick vote after you finish speaking. Or any other comments on the deferral?
No, nothing further to add.
Anyone else want to speak to a deferral? Councillor Ryan?
I'll speak against the motion and foreshadow the motion that we deal with today. This matter we had discussed at workshops. As Mr. Greenberger alluded to, there's been a lot of legal discussion and inquiries been made by different solicitors into it. It's a unique situation. I don't see it as setting a precedent. It's a unique situation in that we have a building built over a boundary. We're not discussing selling off parkland, and I think council has done enough due diligence in the investigation into it, and there's no reason why it can't be dealt with today.
Thanks, Councillor Wright. Any other council want to speak to the deferral? Councillor Wolf.
Please, briefly, Mr. Mayor, against the deferral. Just looking at the documents, the original survey was done 2014 for this issue, and correspondence to council in 2017. Been briefed, as Councillor Ryan said, in workshops and so forth. This situation's been imposed upon us. I'll look forward with interest if this motion is beaten and the decision is made.
Thank you, Councillor Wolf. Any other councillor speaking to the deferral? Councillor Dukas.
No, I won't be supporting the deferral. I can't see the point. We've got heaps of information ahead of us, more than is necessary. And if you look at the map, we're talking about 2.5 metre width.
So sorry, just to clarify, you speak against?
Against the deferral.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you, Councillor Dukas. Councillor Lockett, as the mover of the deferral of the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I said before, this issue was occurred in the 60s. I absolutely think it would set a precedent, because if lot 1's built out a couple of metres, why wouldn't lot 2, why wouldn't the property on Griffith Street, then the whole fence of that whole street line is moved out. So I disagree with Councillor Ryan's statements there. Is it 2014? I don't see why it can't wait another month till we flesh out all the possible options. I think it'd be irresponsible at the last minute, even though it has been plenty of time, and there's been some excellent suggestions from Councillor Smith about possible caveats. All options should be explored. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Lockett. We'll ask councillors now to vote on the deferral of this motion for 1 month. All those in favour of the deferral? Councillor Smith, Lockett and Parker. Those against the deferral? Councillors Dukas, Ryan, Mead and Wolf. So the motion reverts back to as it stands in the agenda to deal with it today, as foreshadowed by Councillor Ryan. So I'll go to Councillor Ryan to speak to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I've stated,
sorry, do we have a seconder?
Sorry.
Councillor Dukas. Councillor Ryan.
As stated, a lot of work has already been done on this subject. Provides it's a unique situation. It doesn't set a precedent. We judge it on its merits, and I think it's a good outcome for the issue that it presents. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ryan. Councillor Dukas as the seconder.
I'll reserve, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Dukas. Any other councillor speaking for or against this motion? Councillor Lockett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Points I've already raised before, as the correspondence we've had from Mr Bolsh. You know, think very seriously about selling off Crown land to private ownership. This is a mistake which someone has done many years ago, and yet we've had good options put before us, possibly tonight, and you know, the possibility of deferral, which has been sitting there since the 60s. There's no immediate rush to get this done. It is a unique situation, however I feel that all possible avenues should be fleshed out, and I think this is not a good outcome. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Lockett. Any other councillors speaking to the motion? Councillor Wolf.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I'll make a brief comment. Is that if you didn't know about this file, or something wasn't discovered about this property and the property line, you wouldn't know that they've infringed on council property. You walk up there, you drive up, and I think locals have driven up there 1,000 times. That's the block of land that belongs to Camfields and so forth, and that's next door. It's not like it obtrudes out on the nature strip and upsets parking or anything like that. There's a property there's a perceived property line that people just think, oh yeah, that's the property line. So this isn't an outrageous settlement if it does occur. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Wolf. Any other councillors speaking to the motion? Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to speak against the motion because I just don't feel we've been given enough alternatives to try and retain the land in the public ownership. So that's my main reason I won't be voting for it, is that we haven't been given other alternatives to try and hold that land in the public use. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. Any other councillors? We're left with Councillor Parker. You're okay. Councillor Dukas, reserved.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, I just want to make a point that the width is only 2.5 metres. Isn't a lot, but the piece of property that's on public land could be an insurance issue, not only for the owner but for us. There's nothing really stopping someone parking right up at that, if there's a front door on that property, there's nothing stopping someone parking right up on that front door. And the argument would be, well, you can't park in my front door. Well, I can because it's on public land. I can park where I like. All this is doing is just tidying up something that's been missed, not in the old Shire days, but in the Belfast days, I believe. The Warrnambool Shire didn't extend then. We didn't make mistakes in the good old Warrnambool Shire days. This is a straightforward application. I've heard what some of the objectors are saying, but really at the end of the day, once all the lawyers have looked at it, and DELT, I mean this will refer to DELT, DELT can put a covenant on saying that there's to be no buildings on that parcel of land. They can do whatever they want, it's their land. We just passed a motion, did we not, Mr Greenberger, to do with unused roads and what happens to land. So if we passed the motion before about where land goes after it's disused, why are we arguing over this? It just doesn't make sense. Let's just show some leadership and do it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Dukas. Councillor Ryan is the mover.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is a common sense solution to a problem that Council has been investigating for nearly 4 years. It's time to deal with it.
Thanks, Councillor Ryan. Okay, we'll call on the vote. All those in favour of the current motion? Councillors Dukas, Ryan, Mead, Wolf and Parker. Those against? Councillor Smith and Lockett. Carried 5-2. Moving on to item 7, proposed memorial plaque. by McDowall's, presented by the Director of Infrastructure and Environment, Mr. Greenberger.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. This report details an application we've received to place a memorial on Blakes Road, Naranda, to recognise the contribution to the Naranda community by John and Catherine McDowall. It's been submitted by McDowall's great-great-granddaughter. The application meets the acknowledgement of community contribution policy, and we're recommending that Council approve the installation of the memorial. Happy to take questions, Mayor.
Any questions for Mr. Greenberger? Okay, I'll seek a mover, please. Councillor Dukas is the mover, seconded by Councillor Smith. Councillor Dukas?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, it's a nice little recommendation. I'm glad that the McDowall family have come forward and seen fit to come up with this idea to produce or put a plaque in recognition of their forebearers. My information from those in the district believe it's a great idea, highly respected from day one, which was well over 100 years ago, and from what the community is saying, it's something that'll highlight, I suppose, a little bit of tourism in that area. I think there's a few other plaques to do with early settlers, shipwrecks and the Whiskey Trails, and this would add to that. So, yeah, well done to the community for supporting it, and to the McDowall family. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Dukas. Councillor Smith?
Yeah, nothing but just good effort with Mrs Miller to apply for the plaque to acknowledge her grandparents and still having a family connection in the area. I think it's a good initiative, and I fully support the motion.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. Any other councillors wishing to speak to the motion? Councillor Dukas is the mover.
No need, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. All those in favour? Carried 7-0. The motion is passed unanimously. Moving on to item 8, proposed tree removal, Norfolk Place, Port Fairy, presented by the Director of Infrastructure and Environment again, Mr. Greenberger.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I might just go over the history of this report because it has been going on for some time and there has been a few complexities within it. Last year, or over the last couple of years, council officers have received a number of complaints from residents in Norfolk Place about fallen limbs, branches and just general tree litter. We went to the community through a consultation process seeking the view of landowners whether they wanted the trees retained or removed. While we didn't get a majority of respondents, the ones that did respond indicated that removal was preferred. This then went to council last year, and council made the decision to remove the trees, but that decision wasn't acted on immediately. And in the meantime, we had people from other residents from Norfolk Place come and ask the council defer that decision to remove the trees until further investigation happened, and they had an opportunity to consult further with members of Norfolk Place community. That has happened, and they've come back with significant support for the retention of the trees. But during that process, council also engaged an arborist to undertake an assessment of the trees, and that report is attached to this council report. And the arborist report does demonstrate quite clearly that most of the trees, almost all of them, are in a poor state of repair, and the arborist recommends removal. If we were to not remove the trees, despite the community wanting them retained, we would be accepting a significant risk because if those branches or the tree itself fell onto a piece of property or, in an extreme case, an individual, we would be in a difficult situation to defend the retention of the trees. So, despite the community concern and will to contain the trees, unfortunately the trees have reached the end of their useful life, as evidenced in the arborist report, and therefore the report tonight is recommending removal. Happy to take questions then.
Thanks, Mr. Greenberger. Do we have any questions? Councillor Lockett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The question is regarding the process that I think you did already kind of highlight it, but just want to clarify that the residents were interviewed about consulted about wanting to, retain or remove the trees. They wanted them retained, and then we got an arborist report. Is there any plans in the future to get arborist reports first?
Through you, Mayor, this probably was a learning experience from the point of view of how you go about removal of all trees in a street. It's pretty rare that we do it, but particularly when they've got adjoining residents. So on reflection, it probably would have helped both council and the community consider decisions if we had have had the arborist report in the first place. So as I said, we could use this as a learning experience, and if we were to go through this process again, we would get an arborist report at the outset.
Thanks, Mr. Grimby. Yes, Councillor Lockett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one more question. Is there any reason, or do we know the age of the trees, roughly?
So I think in the report, through you, Mayor, I think in the report it talks about the arborist report about 20 years old. Is that young for a she oak of this species? Yes, it is. But it's also the consideration of the environment in which they're growing with hard infrastructure such as roads and footpaths around them, and we suspect that may have impacted on the health of the trees.
Any other questions for Mr. Greenberger?
Yeah, I'll answer the last one now. Mr.
Councillor
Greenberger, the consultation process, you're satisfied with that?
So through you, Mayor, in the first instance, we did a letter drop to all residents. We got less than a 50% response rate. I think officers assumed from that the ones that didn't respond didn't care either way. The subsequent consultation process probably indicated that people did have an opinion, they just may have missed the first round of consultation. So probably coming back to my comments around a learning experience, if we had our time again, we probably would make more of an effort to ensure that we got at least more than 50% respondents to say either way whether they wanted the tree removed or not.
Thank you. Councillor Deakin, follow up?
Yes, please. The arborist report, did the residents get a copy of that, or is it only in this report and they'd have to look it up?
Yeah, so through you, Mayor, the residents were notified that the arborist report would be included as part of the council report and was available on the website.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Greenberger? Councillor Smith?
Sorry, just a bit hard to hear, Mr. Greenberg, but did the residents have they had the opportunity to meet with the arborist prior to the report?
Through you, Mayor, no, they haven't met. Because of the COVID restrictions up until recently, it's been difficult to arrange meetings. So we've just had the arborist provide the report as attached to this council report.
So do you think it would be a help if the arborist had been able to meet the residents, because his report was fairly damning of the condition of the trees, and may have been better in hindsight that the arborist had a chance to meet with the citizens or residents?
Yeah, through you, Mayor, the arborist did comment that he appreciated that the residents did want the trees retained. He understands the will, but his role is to provide comment on the health of the trees. And he's basically outlined that, despite the will of everyone wanting to retain the trees, they're actually to the point where they could be considered dangerous and should be removed and replaced.
Thank you. We'll move on to a mover. Do we have a mover for the motion? Councillor Ryan is the mover, seconded by Councillor Wolfe. Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Trees in this quarter are obviously in very poor condition, as detailed by the arborist report. For council not to remove these trees now, council would be, I think, negligent and irresponsible. We are elected to make correct decisions based on all the facts. we're not elected to make popular decisions to please people that are affected by the outcome of a decision. 1/3 of these trees require rod bracing and cables. Having visited the site and just to look at the photographs that are provided, they're obviously in need of removal. To me, they show they're a danger to the people in the street. Like the people who live in the street, you know, if one of their children or grandchildren was injured by a falling limb, they'd be packing our public gallery to ask why we aren't doing something about it. To me, the motion to move the trees is a no-brainer, and commend it to my fellow councillors.
Thanks, Councillor Ryan. Councillor Wolf is the seconder.
I'll reserve, Mr Mayor, thank you.
Any other councillors wishing to speak to the motion? Councillor Lockett.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'll speak for the motion. Initially, I was very against the removal of these trees, and it pains me that we are looking at doing this, but as Councillor Ryan has pointed out, the responsibility sits with council. If a tree was to fall in that street, which is a very high possibility, if you drive down and just glance at the trees, you look, oh, that looks fantastic and wonderful, but if you look closely, there's nearly every tree or every second tree has got big strong cables tying them and hanging them up together, and very unfortunate that drooping she oaks, their age is, they can live up to 80 years, and these ones have only lasted 20, so yet we seem to be putting, obviously because they're an indigenous tree to the area, they go in everywhere, so you know, maybe that's something we need to look at. Very unfortunate, and the residents would like them to retain, but again, how could we, knowing that they are a danger and a hazard, keep them? That would be very irresponsible. So reluctant, but it's the right thing to do, and we will obviously consult strongly with the residents and get the replacement trees planted as soon as possible, as soon as that is appropriately possible with planting, etc. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Lockett. Any other councillor wishing to speak to this motion? Councillor Dukas.
Mr Mayor, I had another quick read. The figure of approximately, or in the vicinity of 20,000 seems to me very high. So I'll take it that Mr Greenberger, once this decision is made, if it is to remove the trees, you'll get prices on removal and replacements the best we can.
Yeah, through you, Mayor, that's correct. We'll go through that process once council makes a decision.
Thank you.
Any other councillors who speak to the motion? Councillor Wolf as a reserver.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, these trees are on our land, they're our trees, and our responsibility, and it's upon us to remove them. I think the right decision will be made here tonight. Of interest, Councillor Ryan and I attended a roads conference, National Roads Conference, and one of the issues there was tree planting and where and how close your pavement is. This may be the perfect scenario of why this has happened to these trees. It's unfortunate they've got to come down if that's the decision of council, but I'm sure an appropriate species will be found and will be wiser for it, and so will all the staff. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Wolf. Councillor Ryan as the mover.
Put it to the vote, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Ryan. Okay, all those in favour? Carried 7-0. Motion's passed. Thank you. Moving on to item 9, Grassmere Footpath. Once again for Mr Greenberger, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Council received a petition in relation to this issue at the April Council meeting. Council officers have in the meantime done some further investigation of the possibility of the footpath as proposed in the petition. The issue with the footpath, constructing the footpath, would be the narrow road reserve and the proximity of the actual roadway to where the footpath could go. So if we were to build a footpath, we would have to construct it at 1.5 maximum down to 1.2. There's a number of power poles that also impact on the alignment of the footpath, which would be a significant cost if they had to be relocated. So officers have tried to design around those poles, but still providing for a footpath, albeit a narrow one. It is 1,250 metres in length, so it's a significant project, and it's costed out at approximately $400,000. The recommendation tonight, Mayor, is that we refer that to future budget processes of council.
Thanks, Mr. Greenberg. Any questions? Okay, we'll seek a mover, please. Councillor Dukas as the mover, seconded by Councillor Smith. Councillor Dukas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, another community project that has a lot of merits. It does sound expensive, but when you talk about 1.2 kilometres, I think Mr. Greenberger said, divide 400,000 into that, it's not that big a deal. However, saying that, it's not an easy sum to find. Referring it to the budget process, I believe, is the right way to go. My only question to Mr. Greenberger would be, how quick could we get this project shovel ready, considering there's money floating here, there and everywhere at the moment? I mean, is there the ability to look at this closer from an engineering perspective, just in case something comes out of the next 12 months before we go to the next budget?
Yeah, through you, Mayor, while it is a difficult project for a footpath project, it could be designed ready for construction over the summer months. So if council were able to find the funding to build the footpath, it could be constructed within the next financial year.
But
Councillor
I was
Dukas.
with, once it's engineered, if there is governments where the state or federal funding comes available for projects because they want to get businesses up and going, etc. If we could get it surveyed and designed, I would have thought before next summer, just in case something does come out of the blue, as we've seen like the other day, the 2.7.
Sorry, Councillor Dukas, just to clarify, you've moved a motion that says refer the construction of the footpath to the 2020-2021 budget deliberations.
Yes.
So that's the plan if this motion is
That's
passed.
the plan, yeah,
So,
to get it to the budget, but
yeah. Are you happy with
I'm happy with
stay
that,
further?
but I'm asking if we could, if there's a way of having it scoped or designed sooner rather than later, it might qualify so we don't have to go through the budget process.
Well, Councillor Dugas, I think that is a discussion when we bring it to the workshop with regard to which projects we consider for the $2.7 million in funding, and in addition to the 2020-2021 budget deliberation. So I think if Mr. Greenberger wants to take on notice with regard to how quick we can be shovel ready, he can do that and hopefully come back to us at the workshop. Councillor Dugas.
No, that's great. I'm not referring to the 2.7 for this project, it's just the 2.7 came out of the blue. Who knows what's going to come out of the red, green and orange?
Yep, I understand your point, Councillor Dugas. We'll go
Thank
into
you,
deliberations.
We're both singing from the same hymn book, I know. It's all good.
Thanks. Councillor Smith as the seconder.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I'm more than happy to move that this go into the 2021 budget deliberation and like I said, move forward on public safety and accessibility in these regional areas. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. Any other councillors wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Dukas.
No need, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. All those in favour? Carried 7-0. Item 10, Assemblies of Councillors. Mr. Millard.
Procedural, Mayor.
We seek a mover for the Assemblies of Councils. Councillor Parker. Seconded by Councillor Wolf. Councillor Parker, any comment?
As the CEO said, it's procedural.
Thank you. Councillor Wolf?
Nothing to add, Mr Mayor.
All those in favour? Carried 7-0. Item 11, Mayor and Councillors' reports. Open that up for any questions from anyone, to anyone on any matters on that report.
Which one is it, Mr Mayor?
Item 11, Mayor and Councillors' reports.
I don't have dividers. No, I can't think of any questions.
It's a whopper.
We're okay there? All right, nothing further there, councillors. Moving on to the item 12.
So,
Councillor Lockett.
sorry, Mr Mayor, it's possible, just a quick question.
Councillor Lockett snuck in.
Oh, thank you. Just regarding the very last one on the 14th of May via computer link, Barwon South West Waste and Resource Recovery Group meeting, 14th of May. That was Councillor Parker, maybe? Just how we're going with our waste, any...
I did attend that meeting representing Moyne because Councillor Smith, his internet wasn't behaving that day and he wasn't able to do it. At the meeting they did approve the 7 programs for the local government programs that have been put forward by the officers, so they were all approved. They included closed landfill aftercare, low food waste campaign, recycling education campaign, zero waste mapping and supply recycling campaign. When we had a look at the local government data for our region, we've been sitting at about 53 to 55% of recycling happening, and it's been consistent. We're 10% above state averages. The state has improved considerably, and the metro area have improved considerably over the last 5 or 6 years, but we're still about 10% higher in keeping stuff out of landfill. So far so good. Our glass seems to be going well, and there is a copy. I think there was a copy circulated if you wanted to have a look at what's happening in the other councils in our region.
Thank you. Councillor Parker.
Any other final questions for item 11? Thanks, Councillor Parker, for that update. Item 12, council notice of motion.
There are none.
Item 13, general matters. Open to councillors and officers with any general matters. Being none, we'll move on to item 14. Urgent business. None. No urgent business. Item 15. CEO meeting schedule and activities report. Mr. Millard.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm happy to take questions on any of those particular meetings I've met, but I will raise a couple of items if I can as far as activities. I'd really recognise Mr. Ledden's team for budget preparation under pretty difficult circumstances, and I think they've done a great job to get us to the point that we are at the moment. I'd reference also the Youth Awards and the Youth Showcase, which occurred online the other Friday night, which I thought was a really good example of how you adapt in difficult circumstances, and people seem to enjoy that particularly. I'd acknowledge the works and preparation, particularly in reopening. We've obviously wound down a number of services to operate in a different style and closed some, such as caravan parks. So our teams at the moment are really working hard in gearing up for the reverse of that. And that will take a little bit of time, but we're well advanced in setting the scene for moving forward on particularly on holiday parks, visitor centres, libraries, etc., after the Premier's announcements on the weekend. I think the stats in the social media in particular show continued increases on people engaging with us through social media, and I'd also acknowledge the better approvals review and improvement process from the planning team. They've done a great job in pulling apart the stat planning process from start to finish and talking to both applicants and objectors about how they found that process and how they could do better and communicate more effectively. And also recognise Mr Greenberger's teams from waste, environment, roads, rehab and so on, who've really kept the work ploughing out the door through this really difficult time. So our staff generally have been very responsive and continued their great work, and there's plenty of examples in that report, Mr Mayor, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr Millard. Any questions for the CEO? Councillor Smith.
Mr Millard, I see on April the 9th, I've got my glasses on, the bushfire briefing, mitigation briefing with power calls, living in a rural area with power calls from charge of our poles. We're just interested to see what came from it.
Through you, Mayor, Councillor Smith, from recollection, I can't recall the actual technology, but essentially it's around the installation of safety switches, so that if there's a surge in power, then that line will shut off, and that's been occurring across Victoria, and they were briefing Mr Greenberger and myself on progress on the key power line that transverses just north of here. So there's really a progress report on how they're going, and they were able to demonstrate to us about the success that those switches had already had in different parts of the state, with immediate shutdowns of power rather than sparking and causing fire.
Any other questions? Councillor Wolfe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Millard, if it's another subject, it doesn't matter, but I noticed there's been a couple of discussions, meetings with Deakin University. Is that in relation to where we are now with COVID and attendances and staffing, or something else unrelated?
Through you, Mayor, probably more, Councillor Wolfe, the project called Great South Coast Economic Futures, which Deakin is a party to, and sort of hosted that report. That work's now finished, and we're trying to move that on with Deakin's involvement.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr Millard?
Yes,
Councillor Dukas.
thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, Mr Millard, wind farm questions. I see here where AGL has submitted an updated environmental management plan. I know nothing about it. I don't know about Councillor Ryan or Councillor Lockett. Do they know anything about that plan? So can we get a copy of that?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'd probably have to take that one on notice.
Councillor Dukas. That's quite all right. Morton's Lane, still waiting to hear about Morton's Lane. The reports have been out for over 12 months and we've got nothing. We received, I think, 3 reports to do with Salt Creek that were marked confidential. Can you tell me why they were marked confidential?
Through you, Mr Mayor, my assumption would be just that they haven't necessarily been to council for a determination, and DELP hasn't formed their opinion on them as well. So,
but I thought under the permit conditions, once those reports are made, they go onto the website, onto the proponent's website. They're not a confidential document.
Again, through you, Mayor, my understanding would be that DELP needs to form that opinion first, but again, we can clarify that for Councillor Dukas on the.
I mean,
on the
hasn't
exact
it been
situation.
clarified through an email to you?
Through you.
Still supposed to put it on their web page immediately. I mean, it's in It's in the policy, it's in the document, the planning document. The plan
Yeah, I
states
guess,
there, and we've got a report that's got confidential written all over it.
Okay, yep.
through you,
Mr. Miller.
Mayor, again, Councillor Dukas, I'll take that on board and clarify why we determined that as confidential, but again, as I understand it, it's just that DELP haven't determined the positioning and it hasn't been to council. But I'm happy to take that offline and clarify.
So we
that.
can get an answer for that as soon as possible, please.
Yep.
And in
Further,
relation to
Councillor Dukas?
that, should we or should the council officers tell Tilt in regard to Salt Creek not to give any member of the public copies of documents?
Oh, through you, Mayor, that would be just speculation on my part, Councillor Dukes. I'm not sure of the reference.
Well,
So
is
Councillor
it
Lucas,
our job? Do we have officers, or do our officers think that they're entitled to tell Tilt who they can and can't give reports to?
So Councillor Dukas, that is a question that once Mr. Millard can get back to you with these previous questions, we can have that discussion at the same time.
Well, I'm just going by what's in the documents that we've all signed.
Do
I
you
find it
have
very
any further questions?
I've got
Councillor
very
Dukas?
disturbing. Very, very disturbing, those type of things. The Dundonnell Wind Farm, to do with native veg. You instructed Tilt to go and make an investigation into the native veg issue about damage, removal, etc., when it's the responsibility of the council. Why aren't we doing that? Why would you send Tilt to check on their own work or their failure to do the right thing?
Mr. Millard.
Again, Mayor, on the specifics of the native veg removal, I would need to take that on notice, but you know, my expectation is that we would be making those representations to DELP or TILT, whoever it is, in line with the permit conditions.
Right.
Okay,
So
thank you. So Councillor Dukas, do you have any other further
Yeah,
questions
well, the
before we
permit
open it up?
do you
to
mind?
other councillors? Yeah,
The
I'm asking
permit
now if
condition
there's
says
any
we're the
questions.
responsible authority. So it's our job to investigate, not to tell the company to investigate something that we believe they've done wrong. Pretty straightforward.
All right, do we have any other questions for
Well, I
Mr.
don't
Millard?
know, where is all this going to end?
Thanks, Councillor Dukas, you've made your point. Any other councillors wishing to speak to the motion? Ask questions of Mr. Millard? No? Okay. That is the activities report and the meeting schedule. We'll now seek to suspend. Councillor Ryan?
Seek to suspend standing orders and move into confidential business.
We have a seconder for that. Councillor Parker? All those in favour? Carried 7-0.